Your computer works. Let me say that again because I want it to end properly before we go any further. Your computer works. It boots up every morning. It runs your browser, your documents, your music, your videos. The fan spins, the screen lights up, the keyboard responds. There is nothing wrong with your machine, and yet right now. In 2026, millions of Americans are being told by the company that sold them their operating system that their perfectly functional computers are no longer supported, not because the hardware failed, not because the software stopped working, but because Microsoft drew a line in the sand on October 14, 2025 and called it end of life. After that date, Windows 10 stopped receiving free security updates. The protection you relied on to keep your machine safe from hackers, from malware, from the vulnerabilities that get discovered every single week, that protection ended, and what Microsoft offered instead was a subscription fee, an annual payment to keep receiving security patches for software you already bought, running on hardware you already own. You are being charged rent on your own property. That is the situation we are in right now, and I think it deserves to be stated plainly before we talk about the solution. The solution, the one I am going to walk you through today, does not cost a single dollar. It does not require you to buy a new computer. It does not require any technical background or prior experience with anything outside of Windows. What it requires is about 30 minutes of your time and the willingness to try something that is genuinely, surprisingly, impressively good in 2026. The something I am talking about is Linux, and before that word triggers whatever image you have in your head, I want to address it directly, because the Linux of 2026 is not the Linux of 2012. It is not a black screen with white text. It is not a system that requires you to memorize commands or read documentation for 3 days before you can check your email. The distributions we are going to talk about today look like modern operating systems because they are modern operating systems. Some of them are so close to the Windows experience that you will genuinely forget you switched. And all of them are completely free, permanently supported, and running on hardware that Microsoft decided was no longer worthy of their attention. Let me give you the numbers first because I think they matter here. As of October 2025, approximately 40% of all Windows users worldwide were still running Windows 10. That is hundreds of millions of people and hundreds of millions of devices left without free security coverage the moment that deadline passed. These are not people who chose to be in this position. These are people who bought computers, installed the operating system that came with them, used those computers faithfully for years, and woke up one day to find that the rules had changed. Microsoft offers an extended security update program that lets you keep receiving patches. Through an annual subscription, individuals can pay for it, but even that is only a temporary bridge. The absolute end of Windows 10 support, regardless of any payment, arrives in October 2028. So the subscription buys you 2 more years of paying for something you already own, at the end of which you face this exact same conversation again. That is not a solution. That is a delay tactic that costs you money. The reason Windows 11 is not the obvious answer for most of these users comes down to hardware requirements that Microsoft introduced and has refused to relax. Windows 11 requires TPM 2.0, a security chip that many older but otherwise capable computers simply do not have. It requires secure boot support. It requires processors. From a specific list that excludes many chips that are still completely fast and functional today. A computer from 2017 or 2018 can run a modern browser, stream video, handle documents, manage email, and do everything the average person needs a computer to do. But that same computer cannot run Windows 11 because of requirements that have nothing to do with actual performance. They are gating mechanisms. They are designed to push people toward new hardware purchases. And for the millions of people who cannot afford new hardware or simply do not want to replace a machine that still works, they represent a genuine problem that Linux solves completely. Linux has no such requirements. It runs on machines from 2010 with full modern browser support, up-to-date security patches, and desktop environments that look better than anything Microsoft has shipped recently. The 7 operating systems I am going to walk you through today were chosen based on one specific criterion. How well do they work for someone who has used Windows for 10 or 15 years and just wants their computer to work without learning a new philosophy? That is the bar, not theoretical benchmarks, not package manager debates. Actual usability for a real person on the first day? I ranked them starting from the most Windows-like experience and moving toward the most capable but slightly more different options. If you have never touched Linux before, the first 2 or 3 entries are where you should focus your attention, if you have some technical curiosity. Or you want more power and control, keep reading because the back half of this list gets genuinely interesting. The first operating system on this list is OS, and specifically version 18.1, which was released in April 2026. I point every Windows refugee towards OS first because of something the developers did that no other team has done quite as deliberately. They did not just make Linux look like Windows, they reverse. Engineered the feeling of Windows, the muscle memory, the instinct, When you boot in 2s or in OS 18.1 for the first time, your brain does something disorienting. It tells you that you are looking at Windows. The taskbar is at the bottom exactly where you expect it. The start menu is in the bottom left corner. The clock and system icons are in the bottom right. Right-click menus work the way your hands already know. File navigation works the way your eyes already expect. The developers studied how Windows users interact with their computers and then rebuilt every one of those interactions natively. The result is an operating system that does not ask you to relearn anything on day one. Version 18.1 added hardware support that addresses what used to be the biggest complaint about switching to Linux. NVIDIA graphics cards, Intel Xe3 GPUs, and AMD hybrid laptop setups now work out of the box without any additional configuration. That matters enormously because driver problems were historically the number one reason people tried Linux and gave up. You would install the system, everything would look great, and then you would try to do something involving your graphics card and run into a wall. Zorin OS 18.1 removes that wall for the overwhelming majority of modern hardware. There is also a layout switching feature that deserves specific mention. One button lets you switch between a Windows 11 style layout with a centered taskbar, a Windows 10 style layout with the left-aligned start button, and even a Windows 7 style if that is where your muscle memory lives. You are not locked into any single look, and the system carries extended security support until June 2029, completely free, no subscription required. The second operating system is Linux Mint, and if Zorin OS is the most thoughtfully designed Windows replacement, Linux Mint is the most proven one. This distribution has topped beginner recommendation lists for nearly a decade for a reason that becomes obvious the moment you use it. It just works. Linux Mint is built on top of Ubuntu, and Debian installs in about 15 minutes and comes with everything you need already included. Multimedia codecs for playing videos and music, a familiar desktop layout, a software manager that works like a free app store, and none of the complications that other distributions sometimes introduce. The current release runs on the Linux 6.17 kernel, which brings dramatically improved hardware support compared to even recent versions, newer wireless chipsets, better power management on laptops, improved USB and Thunderbolt support. The practical result is that Mint works out of the box on a much wider range of hardware than most people expect. The Cinnamon desktop that comes as the default in Linux Mint is the closest thing to a classic Windows 10 workflow you will find anywhere. The start menu is clean and fast. You type what you want and it appears, with no Bing search results embedded in your results, no news headlines you never asked for, no AI suggestions that get in the way. Just your programs, your files, your search. The software manager has tens of thousands of free applications. Spotify, Discord, Steam, VLC, GIMP, LibreOffice, all of it free, all of it verified. None of it requiring a credit card or a Microsoft account for someone coming from Windows 10 who wants the smallest possible adjustment period. Linux Mint Cinnamon is where I would tell them to start. The third option is Ubuntu, and this is where the list starts to offer something genuinely different rather than just familiar. Ubuntu is Ubuntu with the KDE Plasma desktop environment, and the combination produces something that is simultaneously very recognizable to Windows users and far more powerful than anything Windows offers. By default, the taskbar sits at the bottom. The start menu opens with categories and a search bar, application shortcuts line the taskbar, and the system tray lives in the bottom right corner. It maps directly onto the Windows 10 mental model that most people carry. But what separates KDE Plasma is the depth of customization available. Through graphical menus, no terminal required. You want to move the taskbar to the top? 3 clicks. You want a widget on your desktop showing system temperatures? 2 clicks. You want to change the window style, the icon theme, the cursor, the animation speed. It is all in the settings panel. All visual, all reversible. For people who spent years bending Windows into shape with third-party tools, Ubuntu gives you that control natively and for free. The fourth entry is Ubuntu itself, the foundation underneath both Linux Mint and Ubuntu, and it earns its own spot on this list for one reason that rarely gets the attention it deserves: hardware compatibility. Canonical, the company that develops Ubuntu, maintains active relationships with hardware manufacturers. They certify compatibility with specific laptops, desktops, and components. That means your wireless card, your graphics chip, your printer, and your webcam have a higher chance of working correctly on Ubuntu than on distributions without those manufacturer partnerships. Ubuntu uses the GNOME desktop environment by default, which is the most visually different from Windows on this list. The workflow feels different for the first few days, but once you internalize it, once you start launching applications with a key press and moving between workspaces fluidly, you realize that the Windows taskbar was never actually efficient. It was just familiar. Ubuntu also matters for anyone with professional ambitions in technology. It is the dominant platform in cloud computing, software development, and server environments. Learning Ubuntu on your desktop gives you skills that transfer directly into the professional world. The fifth operating system is Pop! OS from System 76, and this is the one that consistently surprises people who assume all Linux distributions are basically the same. Pop! OS is not trying to be the most Windows-like experience. It is trying to be the best desktop computing experience full stop, and in 2026 it made a move that sets it apart from everything else on this list. System 76 built an entirely new desktop environment called Cosmic, written in the Rust programming language, which entered public beta in September 2025. Cosmic is not a reskin of an existing desktop. It is a ground-up rebuild that is faster, more stable, and architecturally cleaner than anything that came before it. Every interaction feels deliberate. Window management has clear logic behind it. The application launcher works the way your intentions work, not the way a committee decided it should work. And the auto-tilling feature, which automatically arranges open windows to fill the screen without overlapping, is the kind of thing that makes you frustrated every time you have to go back to a system that does not have it. For anyone who games, Pop! OS deserves extra attention. System 76 has invested serious engineering resources into making gaming work correctly out of the box. NVIDIA and AMD drivers are pre-configured before the system even installs. You do not hunt for drivers, you do not choose between performance and stability, you do not wrestle. With compatibility layers, you install Steam, enable Proton in the settings, and your Windows game library becomes available immediately. Proton, which is Valve's compatibility layer for running Windows games on Linux, now supports over 90% of the top 1,000 Steam games with ratings indicating they run perfectly or with only minor issues. Linux gaming reached over 5% market share on Steam in early 2026, driven by Steam Deck adoption and improvements to Proton, and that number continues to climb. If you have been holding off on switching because of your game library, check Proton right now with your specific titles. The results will surprise you. Pop! OS also includes a recovery partition built into the drive itself, so if anything goes wrong while you are learning and experimenting, you reboot into recovery and restore your working state without needing a USB drive or an internet connection. The sixth option is KDE Neon, and explaining why it deserves a separate spot from Ubuntu despite sharing the same KDE Plasma desktop requires a specific distinction. Ubuntu takes Ubuntu's stable release and adds a version of KDE Plasma that has been packaged and tested by the Ubuntu team. KDE Neon takes the same stable Ubuntu base, but delivers the absolute latest KDE Plasma release directly from the KDE developers the moment it is ready. When a new version of Plasma ships, KDE Neon users have it within days. Ubuntu users might wait months for it to travel through Ubuntu's packaging process. KDE Plasma 6.6 was shipping in distributions as of May 2026. And the improvements that came from the KDE developer sprint earlier that year represent significant performance and feature upgrades across the entire desktop. KDE Neon is the fastest path to those improvements while still sitting on a stable, well-supported Ubuntu foundation underneath. KDE Neon is specifically the right choice for the Windows Power user who spent years running tools like Rainmeter, custom shells, and third-party taskbar replacements trying to make Windows look and feel the way they actually wanted it to. KDE Neon gives you all of that customization natively, through graphical interfaces, with better performance and better stability than any third-party Windows 2 lever delivered. The trade-off is honest and worth naming. Because KDE Neon ships new Plasma releases quickly, occasional minor bugs make it through that a slower distribution cycle would catch first. Most issues are cosmetic and resolved within days, if you want zero surprises. Ubuntu is safer. If you want the newest features immediately and you are comfortable reporting a bug when you find one, KDE Neon is where the most interesting things are happening. The seventh and final entry is Fedora Workstation, and I want to be direct about what kind of person it is built for. Fedora is what you install when you want to stop just using Linux and start understanding how computers actually work. Fedora 43 launched in October 2025 with the latest GNOME desktop and a new web-based installer, continuing a pattern of shipping the most current upstream software before any other major distribution. The person who created the Linux kernel itself, Linus Torvalds, runs Fedora on his personal machines. That is not a marketing talking point. That is a signal about where the most technically honest and current Linux experience lives. Fedora ships unmodified software exactly as the developers intended it. No corporate additions, no telemetry layers, no default applications chosen for partnership reasons. Security patches arrive within hours of upstream disclosure. The package manager is genuinely faster than alternatives for most operations. The one practical difference from other entries on this list is that Fedora requires a single extra step to enable proprietary drivers and media codecs. There is a third-party repository called RPM Fusion that provides everything, and enabling it takes about 90 seconds following well-documented instructions. After that step, everything Works exactly as you would expect. NVIDIA drivers, video playback, Bluetooth audio codecs, all of it. It is a philosophical choice by Fedora to ship only open source software by default, and it is one you opt out of easily rather than living with permanently. Fedora is for the person on this list who wants to go deeper, who wants to understand the system they are running, and who will eventually look back on every other operating system they used and wonder why they waited. Now let me get completely practical with you, because the switching process is where most people either succeed or give up, and the difference almost always comes down to preparation rather than technical difficulty. The first thing you do before downloading anything is back up your files. Everything important: documents, photos, videos, browser bookmarks exported as an HTML file from your current browser, any game saves stored locally on your machine, any software license keys you will need access to later. Use an external hard drive or upload to cloud storage. This step is not optional, and it is not me being overly cautious. It is the same advice that applies before any major operating system change, regardless of what you are switching to or from. Get your data somewhere safe before you touch anything else. Once your backup is complete, go to the official website of whichever distribution you chose and download the ISO file. FORS or in OS, that is Z or in .com. For Linux Mint, it is linuxmint.com. For Ubuntu, ubuntu.com. For Pop! OS, system76.com. A direct search for any of these names will land you on the right page immediately. Download the ISO, which is a complete disk image of the operating system. Then download a free tool called Balena Etcher, which runs on Windows and handles the next step. Plug in a USB drive of at least 8 GB. Open Etcher, select your ISO file, select your USB drive, and click Flash. The process takes between 5 and 10 minutes. Restart your computer and boot from the USB drive. On most machines, this means pressing F12, F11, F2, or Delete during the startup screen to access the boot menu. Dell computers typically use F12, Asus uses F8 or F2, Lenovo uses F12 or a dedicated button. A quick search for your specific laptop model and the Word's boot menu key will give you the exact answer in 30 seconds. Select your USB drive from the boot menu and let the system load. What happens next is something that surprises most first-time users and is genuinely one of the best features of modern Linux distributions. Every single system on this list boots into a fully working live environment directly from the USB drive without installing or changing anything on your computer. Your hard drive is not touched. You can open the browser, connect to Wi-Fi, test your audio, try the applications, and experience the entire operating system as if it were already installed. Spend at least 30 minutes in this live environment. Test your touchpad, connect to your network. Check that your display resolution is correct. Make sure your audio works. If something fundamental does not work in the live environment, it will not work after installation either, and you can try a different distribution without having committed to anything at all. This is a safety net that Windows has never offered, and it removes most of the risk from the entire process. When you are satisfied, click the install icon on the desktop or in the application menu. The installers on every distribution on this list are graphical, step-by-step, and genuinely straightforward. You choose your language, keyboard layout, time zone, and create a username and password. The one decision that deserves your full attention is the partitioning step. If you want to completely replace Windows and dedicate the entire drive to Linux, choose the option that says Erase Disk and Install. If you want to keep Windows alongside Linux and choose between them at startup, choose Install alongside Windows. The installer detects your existing Windows partition automatically and presents a visual slider for dividing the drive. Give Linux at least 40 GB, more if you plan to install a lot of software. The installation takes between 15 and 25 minutes. When it finishes, restart, remove the USB drive, and boot into your new system. The first thing to do after logging in is open the Update Manager and install everything available. Distribution ISO files are built periodically, and there are always updates accumulated since the last build. Get those installed, restart if the system asks you to, and you are now running a fully current and fully protected operating system at no cost. The questions I hear most often after someone makes this switch center on a few specific concerns. Microsoft Office comes up constantly. LibreOffice comes pre-installed on most distributions on this list and opens Word, Excel, and PowerPoint files reliably for the vast majority of use cases, if you depend heavily on advanced Excel. Features like complex macros or pivot table functionality, the web version of Microsoft 365 available at office.com works completely in Firefox or Chrome on Linux. Every feature of the web applications is available without installing anything locally. For software like Spotify, Discord, Zoom, and Steam, all of these install in 1 or 2 clicks through the software manager on every distribution on this list. The concern that Linux cannot run the applications people actually use was legitimate several years ago. In 2026, it is not. The honest reality of where things stand is this. Microsoft ended free support for Windows 10 in October 2025 and gave users a choice between paying for continued coverage, buying new hardware to qualify for Windows 11, or finding an alternative. The Extended Security Update subscription is a temporary measure that expires completely in October 2028, so even users who pay are facing this same decision again in 2 years, having spent money in the meantime on something they already owned. Every distribution on today's list carries free security support that extends years beyond that date. ZORINOS is supported until 2029, Ubuntu 24.04 else receives updates until 2029 with extended security maintenance through 2034. Linux Mint follows the same timeline. You are not renting these systems, you own them completely. You decide what gets installed, what runs in the background, and when you choose to update. If I were sitting across from someone today who asked me where to start, I would tell them Linux Mint Cinnamon for the first 30 days, not as a side experiment, not as something to boot into occasionally, as the primary system for actual daily work, actual browsing, actual media, actual everything. At the end of 30 days, the decision becomes informed rather than fearful. If after that period you want something more polished and modern, ZORINOS 18.1 is the next step. If you discover a love for customization, Kubuntu or KDE Neon. If you want to go deep and understand the system you are running, Fedora Workstation is waiting for you. Your computer is not obsolete. Your hardware is not the problem. The operating system that told you otherwise was protecting a business model, not your interests. Everything you need to stay secure, stay productive, and stay in control of your own machine is available right now, completely free, on a USB drive you can prepare in 10 minutes. The only thing left is to decide that your computer works for you and not the other way around.